Welcome to Brown Bag History, presented by Revelstoke Museum and Archives. I'm Cathy English, the curator at the museum. And today we're going to be talking about the history of May Day, as it was celebrated in Revelstoke. And as we start, we acknowledge the land, traditions, and culture of four nations: the Secwepemc, the Ktunaxa, the Snipes, and the Okanagan Nation Alliance. We acknowledge our use and inhabitation of this land sacred to these four nations. We respectfully honor their traditions and culture. So May Day was celebrated throughout the British Empire for years. And in Revelstoke, before they started celebrating May Day, they would have the Queen's birthday, which was always celebrated on May 24th. And they used to have events and picnics and that sort of thing to celebrate that. But the very first sort of May dance or Maypole dance in terms of the May Day celebrations was held in 1907. And it was sponsored by the Ladies Auxiliary of the Knox Presbyterian Church, which is just across the street from the museum where the Backpackers Hostel is now. And so they had this event in the Opera House, which was across on the old school property, right across from Woolsey Creek Bistro. That was where the Opera House was located. So they had this event with some of the children from the church. They also had activities for the children, including the fish pond and candy stalls. And the feature of the evening was the Maypole dance, which they called a pretty exhibition by little boys and girls, charmingly dressed, going through the picturesque ceremony of crowning the May Queen and dancing with entwining ribbons. The newspaper said the ribbon drill by 12 dainty little tots made a pleasing item, the quaint posing and tableau effects being well carried out. They had a little local orchestra known as the Armstrong Orchestra, which was playing music, and a few other presentations, including vocal and instrumental selections by Revelstoke musicians. But the tradition didn't continue after that. So it wasn't until 1922 that the Women's Canadian Club decided to restart the tradition of the crowning of the May Queen. At that time, the Queen's birthday was referred to as Empire Day. It had been called that since 1899, and it was observed usually right before the Queen's birthday, during that week. And so the Women's Canadian Club decided that they would have an annual May Queen at the May Day Festival. And it was held that first year on May 24th. And the first queen who was chosen was Doris Abrahamson, who was the daughter of O.W. Abrahamson, who was a well-known building contractor in town. He built what's now the distillery and the old school eatery, built that as the high school in 1914. He built the old Queen Victoria Hospital that's no longer here. He also built the Bourne Brothers General Store that's now Style Trend. So he was well known in town, and his daughter Doris was chosen as the first queen. The event began with a parade beginning at the Queen Victoria Hospital grounds and proceeding to the recreation grounds, which is now Queen Elizabeth Park. So they had several cars. The Boy Scouts were walking ahead, leading the parade. And then they had several floats with the royal party and people involved. They also encouraged people to decorate their cars to drive in the parade as well. So in this picture, they're proceeding on First Street West. And the building that you can see there is there's an accounting office and a few other. I think also in that building is now the kitchen, Big Mountain Kitchen, and that was originally built as the first Imperial Bank. Was later used as the liquor store for quite a few years as well. So that's that building right on the corner of Campbell and First. In the parade, they had the May Queen's car, the attendant's car, and cars with all the other little girls, and 32 children who were taking part in the maypole dance were riding on a big government truck, and high school pupils, central school pupils, the local band, and Selkirk school pupils, and cars decorated by citizens. So it was a big parade that went several blocks, starting from, as I say, from the old hospital, which is where Save on Foods is now, and all the way up to Mackenzie Avenue, and then up to the what's now Queen Elizabeth Park. And here's the mayor of the time, Mayor Buse, leading Queen Doris up to the dais. And you can see on the side that there's boys. They were actually Boy Scouts, but it might not have been formally, they obviously didn't have uniforms at that time, but they're creating a little bit of an honor guard. And then they had a little platform dais, well decorated. The newspaper had almost a full page on this event. So it was considered a really big event, and they recorded every word that everybody said. It said, in her white gown and ermine, the Queen sat, and her attendants, smaller and also, of course, in white, composed a group which created an artistic center of an elaborate ritual in keeping with the occasion. Mayor Buse acted as master of ceremonies and opened the proceedings amid a keen spirit of expectation seen by everyone. The chairman was K.G. McCrae, who's seen on the right, and he said, May Day celebration, which is an Old English custom, dates back as far as the 16th century. It meant the commencement of summer, and after the peasants got their seed all planted, they set aside a day known as May Day, when they rejoiced and made merry. There are still maypole streets and maypole lanes in England, where once the maypole stood, and the children danced upon the green. In our own province of BC, in New Westminster, this celebration has been going on for 52 years. The Hyatt Fire Brigade of New Westminster were the originators, and the day has been celebrated ever since. And he actually mentioned that in the audience was Mrs. McEnroe, who had been the May Queen in New Westminster many years previous to 1922. He went on to say, the children of today will be the citizens of the future, and they will see when they reach manhood and womanhood that the May Day celebration will continue through the years to come, for never are men and women too old in this glorious empire of ours to be children for one day in the year at least. We all enjoy the frolics and happy laughter of the children. Therefore, let May Day live ever in Revelstoke, a day for the children, by the children, of the children. The national anthem was played by the band, with the children singing one verse. And Queen Doris gave a little speech, then actually she gave a big speech, but I'm just giving a little bit of it. It is my desire and command that the games and festivities that have been arranged shall now begin, so that good cheer and happiness may prevail on this my coronation day. And after that, they did the weaving of the maypole. I mean, you can see on the pole that the ribbons are actually done in a pattern so that they are woven onto the pole. So there was actually quite a bit of training involved in the maypole dance so that they got the right ribbon effect on the pole. After that, they had little sports events, including children's races and what they called an egg and spoon race and other races like that for the children. And then they had what they called a dumbbell drill and dance exercise by the high school girls. And they'd been trained by the physical instructor at the YMCA, which was active then. So this was the YMCA drill team. The girls would have been around 14 to 15 years old. And actually the person fourth from the left is Ruby Rutherford, who later became Ruby Dowdy and then Ruby Nobbs, who was my boss at the museum for many years, was really instrumental in the development of the museum. So they were doing a little drill exercise with dumbbells, and they'd obviously spent a lot of time training and doing that. But I really like their bloomers. These are really, really cute pictures. So that was the 1922 event. They also had a tumbling exhibition by the junior school boys, and some other dance events by some of the high school girls. They had held an evening dance for the children from 8 to 9:45 in the drill hall. And they had, as part of that, they had a grand march with Queen Doris being led in on the arm of Mayor Buse. And the royal party formed into a square dance at the close of the march. And that was followed by games such as musical chairs and other events. And then after that, there was an adult dance that started at 10 o'clock by members of the city's baseball league. So it was a big day of festivities and celebration. So they continued with the May Day celebrations for several years. In 1923, the Queen was Alice Dean, and her attendants were Burl Donaldson and Frida Johnson. And then they also had train bearers, who I believe are these little girls, Alvina Tabini and Frances Mulholland. That year, the mayor was Mayor Abrahamson, and the master of ceremonies was T.E.L. Taylor. A lot of the pictures that we have aren't dated, so I kind of slotted them in the eras where I believe they fit. So this might be the 1923 event, but I'm not positive about that. But I really like this photograph. They actually have the maypole in the car with them, and on the front of the car is a doll, probably like a Kewpie doll, which were fairly popular in the 1920s. But everybody put a lot of effort into decorating the cars. You can see there's flowers and ribbon all over the cars there. And I believe this is the 1923 event. Looking at the photographs, that picture of the girl in the center there seems to match up with the other picture that we have of Alice Dean. And here she is after she's been crowned and has her robe and flowers. And as I say, I'm not sure exactly what year all of these photographs were taken, but this was one of the events up at the park. So this is what's now Queen Elizabeth Park. It was called the Recreation Grounds at that time. And then later in the 1920s, it became known as Mountain View Park for many years. In 1924, the Queen was Alice Grower. They held the parade on May 24th, but they couldn't proceed with the crowning or the dancing at the park due to heavy rain. So they rescheduled those events for May 28th. Often when they had the parades, they had a young woman riding on horseback at the front of the parade. And for at least a couple of those years, it was Isabel Corsair, who was Isabel Corsair the younger. Her mother was also Isabel Corsair, but the younger Isabel Corsair became known as the first women's ski jumper, world champion ski jumper in Canada, and was one of the only women who was participating in that sport. So she was involved in some of the events as well. So that was 1924, Alice Grower. And again, you can see the maypole dance, and they would usually have more than one pole, sometimes 3 or 4, and the children would be going around. You can see how they're starting to weave the ribbons onto the pole there. So in 1925, the Queen was Kathleen Harwood, and mentioned how the cars had been decorated in a very artistic manner. and by a man named W.G. Cowan and women of the Women's Canadian Club. I'm not sure that this is the 1925 event, but there's certainly very artistically decorated cars. And you can see there's actually sort of looks like kind of a gauze butterfly on the front of this car. And then we have the Boy Scouts marching along with the car as well. This is right on Mackenzie Avenue. You can see there, this building is Manning's, which at that time was Manning's candy store and confectionery, and is now New Manning's Chinese restaurant. Again, I'm not sure what year all of these photographs are attributed to, but there was a lot of white dresses made for all of these events. All of the children had white dresses and really cute little bonnets. And another one of the ceremonies in the 1920s. There was no event held in 1926. I was not able to find a reason for that. But in 1927, the Queen was Merle Barton, whose father was a photographer in town, and most likely took the photographs because they would always have studio photographs of the Queens. And you can see, what pretty dresses the little train bearers are wearing too. Well, quite cute. Again, we've got a group of scouts leading a parade float. I believe that this is a group from 1927, because it matches up with other photographs, group photographs that we have. But in the tradition, the crowned queen that is going in the parade would have been the previous queen, and because they hadn't had one in 1926, this would be the 1925 queen of Kathleen Harwood. And when I look at the photographs, I do believe that it matches up with her. Right behind them, you can see City Hall, and behind that is a building that's now a modern bake shop. That would have been a bakery at that time as well. So there's another picture of Queen Merle. The note that year said that the procession was led by Rowena McIntosh, who many people knew in town as Rowena Meehan. She was a school teacher in town for many years. And again, there's showing the maypole dancing. There was a lot of hours of training went into doing the maypole dance. Another picture of Merle Barton with her attendants, and they had one girl dressed up, and this is possibly Rowena McIntosh, but I can't be certain about that, because usually the person who was riding the horse at the head of the procession was often dressed as a boy. He's got a fake mustache on there. This is the sort of the larger group, royal group, and very elaborate. In 1928, the Queen was Elizabeth Thompson. Again, they mentioned that they had the maypole dancing, followed by an exhibition of fancy dancing by Miss Edie. I'm not really sure what fancy dancing is. And then they also had folk dancers and bicycle stunts under the supervision of Mr. Smythe and Mr. Sturdy. Mr. Smythe had a cigar store, but also sold bicycles. And Mr. Sturdy had a hardware store, so he would have sold bicycles as well. So they supervised the bicycle stunts. Then they also had the field sports under the auspices of the YMCA. And after the event, the Queen and her party always visited the Queen Victoria Hospital, and they would present any of the patients in the hospital with flowers as part of the day. It mentioned in the newspaper that the day had two purposes: to provide entertainment for the children and to give opportunity to draw the attention of the younger generation to the patriotic aspect of the holiday. Because, as I said, it was held on Empire Day, and there was still that really strong feeling of attachment with with the Empire, with the British Empire. You can see there's no diversity in these photographs. They were all, sometimes some of the Italian children were involved, but it was pretty predominantly Anglo-Saxon background. Certainly the Queens represented that tradition. So there, I'm not sure what happened. I couldn't find a reason for it, but the May Day celebrations kind of died away. Few possible reasons for that. In it wouldn't explain May of 1929, but by the fall of 1929, the Great Depression was underway. So there wasn't a lot of events, especially things that were cost money, happening in the 1930s. And it wasn't until 1946 that the May Day was revived. And that year, Beverly Davis, who was later Bev White, was crowned by the Winter Carnival Queen, Joan Barnes, because they didn't have a reigning May Queen at that time. Said the Friday, May 24th, was the day that they had it in 1946, and it was Empire Day. It said the occasion was observed with a gigantic May Day celebration, the first of its kind in over a decade. And that year it was arranged by the Revelstoke Legion and the Women's Auxiliary to the Legion. The young woman named Myrtle Mulholland led the parade on horseback. Afterwards, they had a dance in the Orange Hall for children. The Orange Hall is where Community Connections has recently moved into, the brick building on 2nd Street West. And then they had an adult dance in the Drill Hall, which is now Trans-Canada Fitness. In 1927, the Queen was Lola Gallicano. And again, the event was sponsored by the Legion. You can see the parade going on here. The Elsie Mason store, the building is no longer there, but it was at the corner of 2nd Street and Mackenzie, where the Royal LePage Realty is now. And then there's Manning's right next to it. There's the crowning of Lola Turn-Ross. Lola still lives in town. She's Lola Gallicano now. Another picture of the same event. So again, it was held in what was known by then as Mountain View Park. In 1948, the Queen was Mary Lou Hume, and in 1949, it was Sonia Coffin. They started the parade at Central School, and they had the Revelstoke Air Cadet Band leading the procession. And then they later had a dance in the Civic Center. This is a picture of the Civic Center. It was originally built as the YMCA building in 1905 and was later taken over by the Kinsman Club and operated as a Civic Center. And this was the community center in town until the current community center was built and opened in 1979, and then they tore this one down at that time. So that was the site of a lot of community events and dances. In 1939, the Queen was, 1950, the Queen was Juanita Cockroach, and they said it was the largest crowd in the history of any celebration. And you can see the bleachers there that were full of people. In some of the earlier pictures, there was another set of bleachers. I think the earlier ones had been replaced. So these were the big ones that were in use in the 1950s until a big windstorm came through in 1955 and collapsed the bleachers, and that was the end of them. But in the 1950 celebration, it said that after the ceremony, they had entertainment by Mrs. Peggy Norberg, who taught Scottish country dance in town, and they did several dances, and they were accompanied by Ian Inkster, who was a piper. He was an award-winning piper. He won awards throughout Canada and even internationally as well. In 1951, the Queen was Irene Chidoba, but it was horrible rain that year, so they put all the events inside the city's civic center instead of the park. There was no May Queen in 1952, but Albert Canyon held its first May Queen ceremony. A young girl named Joyce Todosachuk was crowned, and the events were overseen by Shirley Ludwig of Revelstoke, who organized the events for Albert Canyon. And they, after that, had May Queen ceremonies for a few years. That in 1952, instead of the May Queen ceremony, that Revelstoke was hosting a regional baseball tournament and sports events. And they also held a children's dance in the Civic Center. Again, in 1953, there was no ceremony. Instead, that was the year of the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. So they held a big ceremony in the park on June 2nd to mark the coronation. And that's when they renamed Mountain View Park Queen Elizabeth Park. So that's when the park got the name that we know it by now. Again, in 1954, there was no ceremony. But in 1955, they revived it again. And Sherry D'Arcangelo, local girl, was crowned as the May Queen. And her crown was given to her by Mrs. Delbert Hooley, who was Doris Abrahamson, the first May Queen back in 1922. So it was kind of nice how they brought it full circle. They had a band performing for entertainment known as the Columbia River Ramblers. It was a young people's band from Arrowhead. It said that the talented boys and girls had appeared on several radio programs, so they were quite very good musicians. And that year they had the dinner in the King Edward Hotel. And for more recent people, King Edward Hotel was right behind City Hall in the big empty lot. But for years it was a well-known hotel. In its early days, it was a really fine hotel and had a really good dining room. So a lot of community events were held in the dining room there. In 1956, the May Queen was Marlene Carlson. And again, they had the maypole dancing followed by drills by the Cub Scouts and the United Church kindergarten children and selections by the local band. And in 1957, the May Queen was Fran Mackay, who was the daughter of Dr. and Mrs. Hugh Mackay, a really well-known local doctor. But interesting little note in the newspaper that year said, "The ceremonies proved again that the city's public address system should be thrown in the ash can. Only minor parts of the addresses on the platform were heard by the large crowd." So they didn't have a very good PA system, apparently. In 1958, the Queen was Gloria Monroe, and that year the parade started at City Hall and was headed by the West Vancouver Boys Band, which was an award-winning youth band from West Vancouver. And they performed here in the Golden Spike Days parades a few times in the July 1st. But they were passing through for a band trip that they were on, so they agreed to play at the May Day ceremonies that year. So that would have been a treat. They were a really outstanding band from everything I've heard. Then in 1960, the Sherry Hollingsworth, who was a student at Farwell School, was the May Queen. By then, the Dokies were doing a lot of the carnival events for it, and they held a carnival just a week earlier at the Civic Center grounds, and raising money for the children's playground in Farwell. So they were doing a lot of the carnival things together. But after a while, they kind of split, and then it was the local parks commission that was running the May Day ceremonies themselves. In 1961, the Queen was Judy Aho, and it was sponsored by the Parks Commission, and under the charge of Mrs. Charles Kolofsky, who's the woman that you can see on the stage there. She was really well known in town, really as an organizer of events, especially children's events. She was a really public-minded person. So she was kind of the driving force behind the May Queen events, mostly in the 1960s. And again, they had the Selkirk School Choir under the direction of Mrs. Meehan, who I'd mentioned earlier as Rowena McIntosh, who had been involved in some of the parade events. They also had Scottish dancing and square dancing by the Big Eddie Junior Square Dancers. In 1961, they had 64 children dancing around 4 maypoles. And said apparently that was the largest number of poles and children in the history of the event in Revelstoke. And then they had their dinner in King Edward Hotel. 1962, Judy Bradshaw was the queen. And Mayor Lundell remarked that it was 40 years that year since the Women's Canadian Club had hosted the first festival in 1922. And that year they had their dinner in the Chalet restaurant, which is where WK Garden is now. And at that time, and when it was known as the Chalet restaurant, it was owned by John and Mary Kwong. And the first time I came to Revelstoke to meet Ken's parents, that's where they took us out for dinner at the Chalet. It was really good. In 1963, the queen was Glenna Romeo, and Eileen Dunn in 1964, and Teresa Gagnon in 1965. And then in 1966, it was Joan Pittaway. The photographs were taken by Estelle Dickey. And again, they had their dinner in the banquet room of the Chalet restaurant. And there's Mayor Arvid Lundell, who was the editor of the Revelstoke Review for many, many years. He was also mayor for several years and MLA as well. And then Mrs. Kolofsky. And then there's the Queen of 1966, Joan Pittaway. So the last, and we just had a couple of other pictures showing some of the events, but I wasn't sure what year all of these ones were. Wasn't able to pin down a year for some of the photographs. And doing the maypole dance. These are from color slides by the Estelle Dickey. So the last event that I could find was in 1967, and Mona Gallicano was the May Queen that year. And I couldn't find any other reference to the May Queen celebrations being held after that time. The museum did a reenactment in 1981, and it was Margaret McMahon was the president of the Historical Association at that time, and arranged for a little reenactment here in the museum. And they had children who were reenacting the original. And I think they even did a maypole dance, or at least a version of a maypole dance inside. And they also had the most recently used robe, cushion, and dress donated to the museum, and we have them in our collection now. So that's it about, that's all I really have to say about May Day. And I am not sure when I'll schedule the next Brown Bag History, but I will let people know through social media and through an email. If you want to get notifications of Brown Bag History, send me an email at curator@revelstokemuseum.ca, and I'll put you on our mailing list. Just another thing to let you know, the Heritage Garden Committee is holding a plant sale this Saturday, May 15th, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And all sales are by donation, and the proceeds go to maintain the Heritage Garden. They also appreciate any more donations of plants for the sale. So if you have multiples of things that you're wanting to donate, we'd certainly appreciate that. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time at Brown Bag History. Bye-bye.